Hello and welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Pitt Mailbag Show here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're your hosts, Chris Carter and Abby Schnable, your college writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We thank you for tuning into this show on a Tuesday. We're recording this on Memorial Day. Happy belated Memorial Day to everyone out there. And we hope that you're able to enjoy your long weekend. We're giving you guys some more Pitt talk and really more like college talk because of the NCAA settlement. This show will be entirely about that because we had a lot of questions about it, and we're going to do our best to explain them right here on today's show. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers, as well as the Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. And as always, this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, they have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are for the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. And Abby, it feels like I needed to drink a lot of those beers after reading all the different articles I needed to read to understand what the heck was in this NCAA settlement.
Yeah, it was. I wrote a story about it. Please check it out. I feel like I explained it fairly well, breaking down the different nuances and how it applies to the different Pittsburgh area schools. But yeah, it is very confusing. The amount of hours I sat there just kind of staring at my computer trying to make sense of it. But I feel pretty qualified to talk about it with how much I've researched now. But you're right. It's mind-boggling, really, with everything that this has to do. And the crazy part is it's not official yet. The judge still has to put her stamp of approval on it. So we're on, and she likely will. But until then, we're really just speculating.
Absolutely. And so we want to put that out there is that these are there will be some of these answers that will be based in fact, based on what we understand from the settlement. And some of these we will say like, hey, we don't know this, but this is what we think the outlook could be for to answer this question. So let's start with our first question, which comes from Jake. And there were other questions that came in first, but Jake, I think, allows us to kick this off as best as we can. So let's get to Jake's question, and who asks, how much money do schools get from this NCAA settlement? And is it a one-time thing, or do they get money annually? All of this seems confusing. And yes, Jake, it does seem confusing. But Abby, I think you did a great job in your article breaking down. It's not just one form of money that is going either to universities or to players. There are multiple things being addressed in the settlement.
Yeah, and I think one thing to make clear is that there's no money going to the schools.
Right.
This has, like, the NCAA isn't cutting a check to the school. That's not what's happening here.
Exactly.
Players are getting paid. That is the only group that is getting paid. But when you look at it, it comes down, there's two distinct ways that that's happening. The first one, which is what the settlement really is about, is revenue sharing. So each school will pay up to $20 million, I believe, a year to its athletes in revenue sharing. And that's not additional revenue that they're getting from previous years. This is the same revenue that the university, the athletic departments would get each year. And now, instead of keeping it from themselves to develop new buildings, to hire new people, now it has to be shared among the student athletes. And then, so that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is the whole damages thing. So because athletes didn't get paid, and there are some athletes that didn't even get to benefit from NIL, athletes from 2016 to currently are getting paid damages. And that number is $1.7 billion shared among all Division I athletes from 2016 to current. Now, where is that money coming from is the question. Is $1.1 billion of that is coming from the NCAA directly, whether that's through budget cuts or various sharing of things. But the other $1.6 billion is coming from the 300 plus Division I schools. And that's coming from reductions in NCAA distributions, which comes through a number of different, or it comes through 6 different buckets. But the biggest one that people are talking about is the fact that it's coming from the Basketball Performance Fund, aka the money that they're getting from the NCAA tournament. And when you break it down, that $1.6 billion that the universities are having to pony up, 40% are coming from the Power 5 schools, 60% are coming from anything that's non-Power 5, which some people are pretty upset about. There are a lot of mid-major programs that think that proportionally is not fair. So it's very convoluted. But again, the schools are not getting money here. The players are getting money, and the schools not only are getting a budget cut because they have to now share their revenue, but they're also getting a budget cut because they have to help pay for the damages.
So that's the whole thing here, is that people need to understand this isn't necessarily like the NCAA just having money that they're giving to these universities. This is basically being, hey, you are allowed to play players, and you have to pay players, and there's a certain cap to how much you can play players. But there's also the damages that go back to this, and something that you've been talking about too is how far back does this go? Like James Conner falls under this window. Like if the Steelers fans remember, Pitt fans definitely remember James Conner. You remember James Conner if you're a Steelers fan. Technically he's eligible because he played in 2016. So like there's a window now for players, I think between 2021 and 2016, to get paid, back pay for their time when they weren't getting paid because of this settlement. So that itself is one form of payment here. But the other payment is now teams teams getting this. And I think that kind of goes into Gary's question here. Do all NCAA schools get paid from this settlement? And I think a better way to address this question isn't necessarily do all NCAA schools get paid from this, Abby, but are all NCAA schools now going to be paying their players from Power 5 to MAC or Atlantic 10?
So this really affects the Power 5/Power 4, however you want to explain it, with the Pac-12 dissolving, but it really impacts the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, and the ACC. A little bit, the Big East is they're still not sure if they're going to do it because a lot of this is surrounding football. And usually when you think of a power conference, it's because they're really good in football. So those are the conferences that it really impacts. However, mid-major programs can opt into doing it, but it financially doesn't make sense for most mid-major programs to opt into revenue sharing because they're already losing part of their budget by having to pay for the damages. A lot of these schools don't make that much in revenue anyway, so you're cutting your budget to help pay for the damages. You don't want to cut your budget up anymore as much as you want to pay your athletes. It's just not feasible for these non-power conferences to do.
That's the thing, is that it's still like there's still going to be different levels to this as far as playing fields, as far as advantages to teams. That kind of gets to Patty's question here and asking, how will this impact Pitt, and will this help level the playing field with bigger schools? And that's a great question, Patty. I think that's the big question that everyone is wondering. What is this impact going to be across the board? Because not just Pitt, there's plenty of schools like Pitt that are competitive. They have good years and bad years, but they're not blue chip programs that are like Kentucky in basketball or Ohio State in football, where they're going to have money no matter what happens, and they're going to be able to do this. And my answer to this, Abby, is I don't think this is going to level any playing fields. I think it's going to allow universities to have different ways to make sure to bring players in. But here's the thing: all of those major programs are also getting those same advantages, and it's not chasing away the NIL collectives, who are still going to be raising lots of money and be able to distribute that money however they see fit.
Yeah, and that's the thing you got to remember with this is the revenue sharing is completely separate than the NIL. So yes, athletes are getting a cut of the revenue sharing, but they're also still going to get their NIL paychecks. Essentially what it breaks down to is they're getting a raise. And they're getting more solid money. You don't have to make a deal with the collective. You don't have to make a deal. You are guaranteed now some form of money. But the caveat with that is that the schools, as of now, get to decide how that money is broken down. So I'm gonna steal the example that I used in my story was volleyball. So Olivia Babcock, Rachel Fairbanks, players of the year in respective categories, they're likely to get a bigger chunk of the money than, say, Kat Flood, Dylan Griffin, who just come in to serve. I'm not going to say just come in to serve. They're serving specialists, but they don't play as much. But when you look at the share that Olivia and Rachel are likely to get, it does not equal the share that a player like Jalen Lowe on the basketball team or Nate Yarnell on the football team is going to get. So that's another thing that Pitt is going to have to balance now, is figuring out how are we paying our athletes from quarterback Nate Yarnell all the way to lacrosse players on the team. And that's going to be the interesting part, because no matter what you do, someone's going to be unhappy, because the big football players could be like, I think I should be getting more than this player. And then the Olympic sports feel like they're not getting a big enough cut. And that's where it's going to be a little convoluted. And then the other thing with this is, again, this $20 million isn't being given to them.
No.
This $20 million is existing in their revenue. Like, this is the money that they have to pull from. And if you're not making that revenue, you better find other ways to find that money. So for a school like Pitt, who hasn't been successful in football the past year, you're not going to have nearly as much revenue as, say, an Alabama, simply because you're not getting as many people into seats as a school like Alabama. When you're successful, you're filling stadiums, you're getting a lot of revenue. And that's going to make it tricky for a school like Pitt, because if you're not getting it off the bat, you're going to have to find other ways to make up that money, which could lead to sports getting cut. It could lead to people getting laid off. There are a lot of potential things that this could domino into if schools aren't able to find that money to pay their athletes.
Absolutely. And I think that's the big point here, Abby, is that schools like Pitt that they can't just pull that money out of thin air. They're going to be in positions where they're going to have to make some tough decisions about their athletic department. And like you said, that might lead to certain coaches being cut, certain positions being cut, and them having to shrink in certain ways to, again, find the money to be able to pay their players. Again, that's the whole thing here. Schools aren't receiving when you think of revenue sharing, this isn't like in Major League Baseball, where there's a big pot of money collected from all the media deals and then it's distributed to the teams. No, this is revenue sharing, where each university has to share part of the revenue they're already getting with players, but it's still up to the discrepancy of the university to say who gets what of this chunk of the pie that they're forced to give away.
The one thing that I think will kind of help answer Patty's question is, will this help level the playing field? The idea of adding revenue sharing into collegiate athletics is to help kind of calm down the chaos that is NIL. The idea is that by paying your athlete directly from your revenue, they're going to be less likely to maybe try and search for a better opportunity, because now they're getting their revenue money, their revenue share, and their NIL. And so the hope is that by creating this more secure, you're getting paid no matter what kind of thing, you're not going to see as much chaos within NIL and people transferring left and right just to get a bigger paycheck. However, this is college sports. It is a business. These athletes do want to get the biggest check that they can get. So it's not going to go away. But the hope is that it kind of calms that chaos down.
Absolutely. And I think a big part of this too is going to be, how does this get built out? Like, how do schools make these decisions? Are there slotted positions that they create where, like, hey, if you're X player on X team, do you get this certain amount of money that's being laid out there? I think that's where a lot of this comes to. And I want to switch questions to Orlando, because this is kind of where we're going next. And Orlando asks, are players under contract now, or is there any structure to how players get paid? And no, they're not under contract, but it's the universities, I think, with this ruling, they're now in a position where they have to give away money. They're going to try to find some form of control. And this, again, this is not fact. This is based off of speculation, the way I understand things here, Abby. But I truly think what's going to happen here over the next few years is you're going to see legal teams from universities plot out a path for them to find a way to have as much control of players as possible without them being official employees, so that they don't have to award them the protections of being employees. But the Wild Wild West, as we've all kind of called the NIL situation, it's now getting more structure to it a little bit, but it's also still giving the universities free reign with how they want to do it. And that's where I think this can get really crazy, is because how Pitt's going to do it is going to be way different from how Ohio State's going to do it. And I think everyone's going to have their own version of how their revenue is being shared with their athletes until there is a model that seems to work better than others. And then people start to adopt those models.
I think you're definitely going to see, oh my gosh, my dog today. I think you're definitely going to see schools try and make as much structure as possible. I think schools are not going to want to leave it up in the air on who's getting paid what, because like I mentioned earlier,
Right.
that's going to lead to a lot of frustrated people if you do
Mhm.
it that way. So by, say, a school like Pitt before this starts, which again, most people are speculating that this isn't going to start until the fall of 2025, just because there are a lot of things. The judge still has to put her stamp of approval on it. There are even more lawsuits out. Like it's chaos. But schools are going to try, like you mentioned, to have as much control. And I wouldn't be shocked if you see schools releasing, at least to their athletes, or having it within their department, a structured system on how they are going to be paid to try and keep things, as fair as possible, I guess, in a way. But at the same time, you're still going to see those big ticket sports, those revenue sports, getting the biggest chunk of this, simply because they're really the ones driving it in. The one thing I do want to say is I've gotten a lot of questions on Twitter and in my email about this, is, are they employees now? No, they're not employees, because the NCAA and the universities do not want them to be classified as employees, simply because, like Chris said, they don't want to have to offer them the protections of that. And it makes things a lot more complicated too by making them employees, because now there's, you've got to have contracts, you've got to have just a wide variety of issues that the universities themselves don't want to have to deal with.
Right.
And this is a way to hopefully kind of quell there are athletes out there that want to be employees. And this is a way for, hopefully, the schools, the NCAA, to kind of squash that and be like, here, we're giving you money. It's okay.
Right.
You don't need to be an employee. We're paying you, but you're not an employee. And that's the thing, is we need to get through our head, is the NCAA and these universities do not want these athletes to be employees. They don't.
No.
And so this is a way to kind of assuage their concerns, assuage their just them wanting money, by saying, here, we'll share our revenue with you, but you're not an employee. And the moment, and that's difficult. Go ahead.
No, to your point though, I think what's going to be really interesting too is they don't want them to be employees, but the NCAA keeps having to back up its position of where it is and to create new leniencies, new things that it has to give up to players. And as an institution, they are going to try to find a way to stop this. And that's because even with this settlement right now, this does not preclude students or student athletes from more antitrust lawsuits that moving forward. Like, the NCAA is still liable. I mean, there's other lawsuits, like you said, that are still on the books, and there's more that can come. Like, this isn't even the end. This state of what we're talking about, like, this is breaking open a whole new world of college athletics. And it feels like deja vu, because we said this just a few years ago when NIL became a thing. And the thing is, Abby, and this could happen again with another lawsuit that might happen, or one that we don't even see down the road. So, like, in 3 years, we may be talking about more money that the universities have to delve out. And I just, with the way that these institutions work, they're going to want to try to stop the ground that they are losing to the players. And again, I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but I have to, and this is my speculation on how this is going to work. I think that there are going to be legal teams across the country from major universities, major conferences, the NCAA itself. They're going to be saying, hey, how do we create a relationship with student athletes where they're receiving the money and it satisfies the court's needs? Because that's the whole point. Is, years ago, I think it was 2020 or 2021, when the initial ruling came out that you cannot just not pay players, because where else in the world do people make you billions of dollars and you do not pay them? I think they have to find a way to counteract that. And I don't know what that even looks like. I don't even know what that sounds like, but I guarantee you that is the number one goal for these institutions right now, while they're having to start dishing out more of their money to players.
I will note that the damages part of the settlement is as kind of a promise that more lawsuits under the same umbrella as the 3 lawsuits that led to the settlement don't happen. So athletes that benefit from the damages are not allowed to sue the NCAA for this similar vein of things. It's in a way trying to protect the NCAA from more lawsuits by providing these damages, by settling this now, which does help, the NCAA, but athletes can still opt out, which means athletes can still come back later if they opt out. But
Class action lawsuits, man.
Yeah, but if they accept the damages, the thought is that, okay, now you can't sue us for this down the line. But again, there's still so much ambiguity with this. There's still so many things that, people are going to find loopholes and keep suing, even though this is a whole, we're saying take the damages and then you can't sue us again. They're going to find other ways to sue because, again, money is money and people want it. And it's very complicated, convoluted, and hopefully we'll get more answers as the process keeps going on, but it's just another kind of notch in this ladder of changing collegiate athletics.
Absolutely. There's so many things to address here. And here's the thing, we're still touching the tip of the iceberg with this 25 to 30 minute show that we do. There's still so many other aspects and there's still so many other questions that we received that we can't even fit into the show. But I wanted to include this next question because I think this is a good question because this could be another angle of lawsuits that could come their way eventually. And this one comes from Leanne, who asks, how will Title IX impact the settlement? And boy, Abby, the thing is that Title IX kind of doesn't really have a place just yet in this, but you best believe it's going to be coming. Title IX has forever changed how college sports works in general, but there's no answer on how it's going to impact this right now. But I guarantee you, if schools come out and let's say 90% of that money is going to men, I could see some lawsuits coming down the line. They're like, hey, this is breaching Title IX. This isn't the same opportunity. There's so many untouched legal avenues that exist here that we can't even fathom how this is going to work. And that's why we say a lot of this is just speculation on our point.
Yeah, and I think there are 2 parties with this on what people think is going to happen with Title IX. There's the group of people that think the universities have done their job. They've created the sports. They're still giving them the same resources. Revenue sharing is separate. That's what some people are saying, that they can pay the men's way differently than the women's because they're offering the women's sports. They're giving them the resources. But that's where the ambiguity of opportunity comes from. Are schools stifling these women's sports opportunity by not giving them as big of a cut? And it's nuanced, and there's going to be a lot of reading into the words. But then the other side of it is, no, this is part of opportunity. It has to be split down the middle between men and women. But when you look at that, it's not going to be like every women's athlete is going to be paid the same as every men's athlete. It's going to be proportional. If you have to split it, men's get 50%, women's get 50%. You're going to see, for example, at Pitt, the teams like volleyball and soccer get paid more than some of those other women's sports just because they're more successful. Because again, we're looking at revenue sharing, and the teams that are bringing in revenue are going to feel like they should get a bigger chunk of this. And how Title IX fits into that, we're not sure. They're going to be, I'm sure there already are a lot of lawyers looking at the little details of Title IX and figuring out, do we have to do 50%? And I'm sure there's going to be some clarification. If the judge doesn't clarify it, that's a missed opportunity, because I think there needs to be clarification before this starts. Otherwise, it's just going to cause way more issues down the line.
Let me tell you, judges, if they don't have to touch a legal issue, they don't want to touch it legal. Did y'all ask me that question? No, that's someone else. That's someone else's problem to decide. And I think that's what's going to happen with this Title IX stuff, is that you're going to see, again, it goes back down to how are these models built for how the revenue sharing works at each university. And then And then also, like, because it's at university, is it public information who gets what? Like, this isn't an NIL collective that's a private entity. Some of these are publicly owned universities. Can that be something that we start to find out, is how much of these are players getting paid for different things? How does this revenue sharing work? And then after these models are instituted in 2025, and we start to see this for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then we start to collect, then we'll start to see, like, one, how will we just discern whether or not women are making as much as men? How or what percentages of this goes out to different players, or what teams get everything? And then how do people respond to that? Are there lawsuits? Are there more antitrust lawsuits that come from that? And that's where, again, like you said, up to the people who are benefiting from this lawsuit right now, like the people going back to 2016, they're done. But guess what? Player X that comes in 2025, I would say Brandon Cummings. Like, if there's something that if there's a class action lawsuit that applies to him, he can jump in on it in 2024. So there's all sorts of things that have to happen before we start to get answers on what exactly will be a Title IX impact or impact from other things. But I think the point is that a lot of this is still very open-ended, and lawyers across the country right now are making a lot of money having to do the research to prepare for what's coming next.
I also won't be surprised if you see a lot of, like you mentioned with NIL, like, say, football player X gets a bigger cut of the revenue sharing, right, and someone's like, well, why aren't you paying volleyball player Y as much? I wouldn't be surprised if there starts to become the conversation of, oh no, well, we're paying her from NIL. We're paying her more NIL money. And that makes it tricky, like you said, because that's private.
Yep.
They don't have to disclose. And so we will never truly know if they're saying that, if it is an equal kind of thing. If whatever volleyball player Y is making from the NIL, does that match what football player X is making from NIL and revenue sharing? And it's, this topic is so convoluted, and it's great for the athletes to be getting paid, to be having this, you're absolutely getting paid now. It's not, you have to
Yes.
get an NIL deal, which is fantastic for the athletes, but it does create a lot of chaos and a lot more questions, which is where we're at with the process now.
Absolutely. And we'll be here to take those questions here on the Pitt Mailbag Show from Chris Carter and Abby Schnable. Thanks so much for tuning in to us, the Pitt Mailbag Show from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Remember to subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We also have a new deal out for anyone who wants. We have a flash sale where you can get 3 months for 99 cents to subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Go sign up for that at post-gazette.com. Also, you can read all of our articles there at post-gazette.com, and you can find all of these podcasts on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of the daily content that comes out from all of our different sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter and Abby Schnable, we hope you had a great holiday weekend. We'll be back on your screens and in your ears very soon. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.